We are now live and you may begin the meeting.
I'd like to call to order the Sierra Madre Planning Commission meeting of Thursday, February 4th, 2021. If we can start with roll call, please.
Chair Dennison,
Here.
Vice Chair Pesner, Commissioners Dallas,
Here.
Hutt,
Here.
and Spears.
Present.
Next up is approval of the agenda.
I'll make a motion, we approve the agenda. Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries unanimously. Next up is the approval of the minutes of the January 21st, 2021 Planning Commission meeting. Are there any additions, edits, or comments on those minutes? Hearing none, I'll ask for a motion to approve as submitted.
Also move. I'll second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Next up, our council liaison report. I don't see him listed. If we have this later, we'll address that then. Next up is community input. At this time, any person may address the Planning Commission concerning an item that is not on the agenda. The Commission welcomes your attendance and participation virtually. When addressing the Commission, please begin by providing your name and address for the record. Please keep comments to no more than 5 minutes to assure an orderly and timely meeting. Copies of the agenda are available for your convenience online. State legislation, Government Code Section 54954.2 limits the Commission's ability to take action on specific requests. Government Code Section 54954.2 limits the placement of items on the agenda for action 72 hours prior to meetings, except for specific findings. No action or discussion may be undertaken by the Planning Commission on any item if not posted on the agenda, except that commissioners or staff may briefly respond to statements made or questions posed by the public, or a commissioner or staff liaison may ask a question for clarification or make a brief report on his or her own activities. A commissioner or the commission itself may provide a reference to staff to report back to the commission at a subsequent meeting concerning any matter, or may direct staff to place a matter of business on a future agenda. We'll give people just another minute unless you have somebody queued up to speak. I see no attendees, so we'll just give people another minute here. Sometimes it can be challenging to get in. Holding for community input at this time. It appears as if we have nobody for community input at this time. If anybody does jump on in the next couple of minutes, please let us know and we will stop what we're doing and hear that input. Other than that, we'll move on to the public meeting. First agenda item is Unreinforced Masonry Building Ordinance and Risk Reduction Program.
We do have a staff report today. We're going to be going through the modifications. The last time the Planning Commission reviewed this project was on December 17th. And at that time, the commission reviewed a red line version of the ordinance that was drafted both by myself and our city attorney, Alex Garagosian, went through quite a bit of that material, as well as Darren Raskin providing further input on the ordinance. So we have amendments that we are recommending today that were identified by the commission as well. And also, I just wanted to point out at the commission, at the direction of the commission on January 13th, staff did send out notices to the property owners of the unreinforced masonry buildings and did invite them to this meeting today as well. Staff is recommending that the Planning Commission review the revised draft ordinance, approve Resolution 20-21, recommending to the City Council approval of a draft URM ordinance and risk reduction program. So let me see if I could bring up the ordinance, the red line ordinance here. One moment. This is not it. Here we go. Yeah. Can you see my screen yet? Because it keeps saying that my sharing is paused.
We can see the ordinance amendment priority list for
Okay.
calendar year 2020.
I can see it.
Okay, great. So we'll go through this. What I've done is reordered the ordinance. I've included each section that you see here: purpose, adoption, definition, contents of order to retrofit, priority of service, compliance timeline, compliance requirements, demolition requirements, timing of service of the order to retrofit, buildings eligible for historic designation, plans approved prior to construction, historic landmarks, additional standards, guidelines, order to retrofit recordation, notice of requirements for public, penalties, appeals, and filing. So as we go through the ordinance, as you see in your attachment, there are a number of strike-throughs, and they reappear in other sections only because of the change of the order in many cases.
Vincent, do you have what you just read? Was that what's on your screen? Because that's not what we're seeing.
That's what I have Exhibit B up.
No, we don't see that, or I don't see that.
Let me do a new share, go back to Exhibit B and share again. Do you see that now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So that's Exhibit B in your packet. So basically that's the order of the document that I just went through. So one of the first things in the purpose statement, we had a number of changes. And most recently this evening, our building official, Darren Raskin, wanted this one section that I have highlighted in yellow, redrafted to read as follows. Most URM buildings are constructed prior to when the state set minimum seismic safety requirements through the Riley Act in 1933. And you can see the language that was there. Currently, that's in your packet. And it appeared that it kind of read in a reverse statement that buildings built prior to 1933 were all unreinforced masonry, but that may not entirely be the case. So we just wanted to make that clarification here.
Okay.
And there were a couple of other edits, I believe, that Alex made in terms of citing government code. We wanted to put government code in front of the section, make it a little bit more clear. And same thing here, in compliance with state law, the city of Sierra Madre desires to replace Ordinance 1059 adopted in 1990 and established a new risk reduction program. The commission at our last meeting asked staff to include a similar statement to this. The city also recognizes that a property owner may desire to replace a URM building with new construction. The provisions in this chapter will not prohibit the demolition and replacement of URM buildings with new construction. The concern was that we appeared to be heavily leaning towards absolute retrofit of all buildings, and that is not the case. If there was a desire or if there was a need because of the building poses a health hazard, it could also be demolished and replaced with new construction.
Can we, on that line, can we
Yes.
move of URM buildings to after demolition? So it reads not prohibit the demolition of URM buildings and replacement with new construction.
Sure, we can go ahead and do that. And Claire, if you're taking notes on that one. (1544-030) definitions. So this was believed at the request of the commission. My notes are on the slide. I can hardly see them here. Historic landmark shall have the same meaning as defined in section 17.82.030 titled definitions. And it goes on to say masonry construction means unit construction consisting of brick, concrete, block, tile, stone, or similar material. Potentially hazardous building was amended, I believe, by Alex. And it's basically indicating that buildings have potentially hazardous buildings or buildings having 5 or fewer units. Historic landmark designated or historic landmark designated prior to the effective date of this ordinance. The commission amended that to make sure that if letters go out and property owners decide after the fact to determine that their property is historic, this would prevent them from doing that to get around the requirements of the ordinance.
Thank you.
And human habitation, this is the one where Alex is going to review that statement. And I believe, Alex, you determined that it was fine as addressed.
Yes, yes.
And reviewing authority means the building official, except as otherwise provided by this chapter. And here are contents.
Sorry, I just want to put a pin in that definition of reviewing authority, because I think later on when we talk about demolitions, we don't otherwise provide. And so when we get there, we can look at it and see if we want to change this definition or later on in the chapter. But I think one of the issues is that if the reviewing authority for a demolition permit or otherwise is somebody other than the building official, then we want it to be the same, whoever's doing that approval. And so I just want to make sure we tie that back.
Okay.
Apologies for my late joining, everyone.
Contents of the order to retrofit. So I think we went through this last time, and what I've done remember I mentioned that I've changed the order. That's why it's appearing here again as underlined new text, but this was in a different section, but we moved this up. And the same thing with order to retrofit. And then we have the compliance timeline. I also moved this up from a different section. And it also reflects the dates that were suggested by the Planning Commission as well. Section C moved over from a different area in the original document that we looked at our last meeting in December. And there were a couple of edits that were made at that time, as you can see, that were highlighted here. And then the compliance requirements, a couple of edits, and move the section over. And these next sections were omitted, and some of them were already moved elsewhere to other locations that we just went through. This is demolition requirements. We clarified a couple of section callouts here.
I'm sorry, I was looking for under the compliance timeline. I thought that we had asked for somewhere that they could ask for an extension of that time period.
It may appear later on, but let's see if it's in this one. So right here, let me highlight this for you. The property owner may request a time extension in order to obtain necessary entitlements to perform the retrofit, which may be granted at the discretion of the director.
Vincent, I have a question on the timeline of this whole ordinance.
Mm-hmm.
We're reviewing it now. We'll get another pass at it. It'll go to the city council. They'll do things with it. It'll eventually get passed by them. When will this become something that the local building owners have to start doing? In other words, the 180-day, 270, 360-day timeline begins when?
So if we were going on track and the Planning Commission recommended approval to the City Council of this ordinance, and I scheduled this before City Council on March 9th for first reading, we'd go to second reading on March 23rd. The ordinance would be effective 30 days thereafter, which would put us at April 22nd, and which would start the shot clock, but once letters go out. So whatever that date, maybe the letters go out the first week in May, 180 days thereafter, property owners would have to begin submitting documents for review, structural documents to the planning department, and that would put us in November.
And Commissioner Spears, the timeline that Director Gonzalez outlined, that's if we did everything
Perfectly.
Right.
perfectly, and if we did it in quick succession. But if you go to, we're not there yet, but if you, we added, I think this is new, I think Vincent and I both added section 15.44.090, which allows the commission to set no later than date for sending out those notices. So we could push out the date for sending out those notices if the Planning Commission recommended that.
Yeah, And when we get to 090, I wanted to talk a little bit about that. And Darren Raskin, our building official, had some input on that.
Okay.
We'll talk about that in a second.
I mean,
But
the good news is that you've already notified the building owners that this is coming their way, and we've heard some feedback from them about that. So yeah, I'm of two minds. One is that this is a 30-year-old regulation that hasn't been complied with, and the other hand is they've just been notified. So, you know, I go back and forth. I mean, if they've owned this building since the 90s, then I'm not that compassionate. But if they bought it yesterday and suddenly this arrived on their desk, I have some compassion. But you know, let's look at how this thing plays out.
okay. So going back to our discussion, I read that there is the opportunity for extension to obtain entitlements, and that's repeated down here again.
But the extension to obtain necessary entitlements, what does necessary entitlements mean to these owners?
So if they had to go through a design review, for instance, because they needed to alter the facade of the building. So anything that would require additional, more planning entitlements. Or in number 3, it's referencing more extensive work identified to be performed in the retrofit.
So hardship isn't a reason that these timelines would be extended, simply the administration of getting through planning.
At this point, unless the commission feels that that needs to be included as well.
Okay.
So just a couple of updates here, referencing the original document under compliance requirements. The commission had asked us to remove this from our last meeting, or I think when I went through this again and doing the reorder, this has been removed from here. Demolition requirements of URM buildings. Here's a couple of other changes that were suggested. Demolition requirements. Applications for demolition of a URM building shall be filed in accordance with the request for demolition as set forth within section 17.60.056, discretionary demolition permit, and section 15.04.115 titled demolition permits. Commission asks staff to reference those specific sections of the code.
So here in paragraphs C and D, we use the reviewing authority term.
Yeah.
And you can see in A, under that demolition ordinance, sometimes that's the director and sometimes that's the planning commission. And under B, sometimes the certificate of appropriateness are the planning commission.
Mhm.
And then in C and D, we don't say that. So that's why I was thinking in the definition where we talked about before, where we say the reviewing authority is the building official, we should say something to the effect of, is the building official unless another application or an entitlement is required, in which case the reviewing authority will be the person or body that grants that other entitlement.
Okay.
Something to that effect. Alex can get the language exact, but that concept there.
Okay, and that'll appear in 15.44.033 or 030 definitions, reviewing authority then.
Yes, right.
That section there. Okay. So just referencing sections, these were changes made by the commission at our last meeting that you see here. And F, the provisions of section 15.04.115 subsection J of this code shall apply to property on which a URM building was demolished after the effective date of the ordinance codified in this chapter without the approvals required herein. Now, the note that you see here, consider in tier system. So this is the timing of service of the order to retrofit. And at the recommendation of the building official, he was suggesting to eliminate this section in its entirety. And then of course the other sections would be renumbered. But the reason is this was tied back to a level of risk by each of the buildings: high risk, medium risk, low risk. And as you note in the images of each of the buildings that's pictured in your packet as well, it denotes a risk. Most of them are high, risk level 2 and 3. And if Darren Raskin, our building official, can expand on that description a little bit for us, I think it'd be helpful. My understanding was that the risk level 2 and 3 would be treated equally according to the building code requirements.
Yeah, so you want me to add to that? I can.
Sure.
So yeah, so the ratings there, the risk level ratings, it's basically tied to the use of the building more than anything, and based on the the risk to life safety. So a higher occupancy building would be a higher risk than a lower occupancy building. And in the case with Sierra Madre, there's no essential buildings that are being considered for this retrofit. And if you look at the where these definitions came from, they came originally from Division 88 from the LA City Code, which was implemented in the 90s, which became kind of the standard for the unreinforced masonry retrofits. And medium risk is most buildings. I can go ahead and read the definitions, but the big difference is I think all the buildings will fall into medium risk. There's only one possible building that might fall into the high risk, and I believe that's the big historic church. But because it's a historic building, there's it's exempted from this requirement anyway. So that's why I propose one of the solutions to this is just eliminating all the the different risk or the high risk, low, medium risk, the categories of the or classifications of the buildings, and just going with one requirement and one timeline for the whole ordinance.
I would agree with that. The buildings in Sierra Madre get repurposed and used by different tenants, and so the risk factor would change from occupant to occupant. So if it's based on who's in it, then yeah, they should all be treated the same.
And yeah, and then to add to that too, a high risk building based on Division 88 is classified as an essential building having an occupant load of 100 occupants or more. Or I'm sorry, of any building not classified as an essential building having an occupant load of 100 occupants or more. So that's a fairly large building to get up to 100 occupants, and it would be maybe a restaurant or bar or church, some kind of an assembly type building.
So do the other commissioners agree that this section could be omitted?
I agree.
Yeah, I think one of the issues that we were talking about with this is sort of folds into the question of hardship for building owners' compliance, and that if it were a low risk building, it wasn't as pressing an issue that would need to get remedied. And so if we're finding out that the categories don't really provide any kind of relief in that, I definitely think we should take this table out, in fact, this whole section. But then the question is whether we build in the schedule above where the director has some discretion to extend the timelines for other entitlements, if we also add a hardship component in there, so that if somebody has an issue with trying to do this, especially during COVID when there's not a lot of rental income, that there might be some relief.
We can come up with some language for that. That's a good idea.
You know, and something else to maybe that might contribute to that concern is in the compliance timeline that we went through before, I guess it would be 15.44.060A3. And so I think the idea is obviously there's going to be cost in doing inspections of the buildings, doing an engineering analysis to determine what needs to be done. So those are costs. There's some testing of the materials that is involved. And then, possibly anchoring and doing some reinforcing. A lot of the reinforcement might, or is, I would expect to be relatively inexpensive. And in that section that I just referenced, it says, that the property owner may request a time extension in order to complete more extensive work identified to be performed for the retrofit, which may be granted. So basically, if they get in there and they do the initial analysis, I think it would be advisable at least to get them to do that initial analysis as quickly as possible to determine if there's any major concerns for the building outside of just being an unreinforced building. And then if the work is recommended to be, or the work recommended to be done is extensive, then they can request that extension, which would kind of play into the hardship because maybe it would be more costly at that point.
Okay, yeah, I think that makes sense. And I'm reading this language, I can see where you're seeing the interpretation of that, because I focused on the 1 and 2 above. So I think we sort of have a little bit of built-in hardship exemption there. That makes sense. And I agree with you about we want to do the testing because that'll tell us if it's a very dire situation or not.
Which should be part of what's considered in relief. Life safety should be.
Exactly.
Right.
I agree. I have an overarching question because I like to throw wrenches into the machinery. Why are we limiting compliance with reinforced masonry only to multi-dwellings? Why wouldn't we want every unreinforced masonry building in the town to be retrofit?
Ooh.
I can answer that. I can answer that with respect to single family homes. Single family home, we don't have, this authority comes to us from the state, and the state expressly excluded single family homes from the definition of the URM buildings. But were there other buildings that you were thinking about beside historic properties and single family homes? And sorry, it's not only a single family, I'm sorry, it's like units 1 to 4 units.
Yeah.
Is that right, Vincent? 1 to 4?
Yes.
Yeah,
I think it's 4 or 5.
Five, I believe it's 5 units.
Yeah.
Up to 5, okay. So residential units up to 5. So if it's a multifamily residential up to 5 units, then it's excluded from the definition of a URM building. But maybe were there other buildings you're considering, Chair Denson?
No, you've answered the question. The state only gave us the authority to mandate this for buildings that have 6 units or more. It seems like just because you have 5 units that are unreinforced masonry, it should be just as important to upgrade and retrofit those. But it sounds like what you're saying is that the state has only given us the authority to do this to buildings that are 6 units or more.
Actually, I think it says less than 5, I believe.
Well, this code says buildings having 5 or fewer units.
Okay.
So I assume that that's based off the state statute, which would be 6 units or more.
Yeah.
In the past, the city has promoted structural mitigation and tying single-family residences to their foundation and things like that. But there are a number of buildings in town that are made out of adobe. There are a number of buildings in town that are structurally exciting in terms of, you know, how they're built. And I don't know, I'm not aware of any mechanism that we have of alerting the homeowners, but I would love to see it done because those are the ones that are going to pile up. I mean, we found a lot of unreinforced chimneys in the Sierra Madre earthquake, but there are other buildings in town that that are not reinforced.
And on that point, I think it might be I have to look into it. I haven't researched the point yet, but requiring retrofits for buildings not subject to the state law is legally tenuous. I don't know whether we can do it under the city's police powers, but certainly having a list and like doing inspections would definitely be within the city's police powers. And so to Commissioner Spears's point, in the future, if we wanted to collect a list like that of properties and to notify them, that's something that the city could definitely do.
You know, both Tom and I were on the fire department, and on a regular basis, we were in private structures for other reasons. And, you know, if there was a fire, we would hope that it got followed up by some kind of inspection by a building inspector. But sometimes we were in a building for other reasons, and we were aware that, you know, the building's lineage was a little, you know, suspect. And I mean, some of us know where those buildings are now, but I don't know whether I think the city would have to set up a program to make homeowners aware.
All right, thank you for indulging me on that point.
We go back to section 15.44.100. Buildings eligible for historic designation. I just inserted designation here. No urine building shall be designated an historic landmark prior to completion of retrofit. We went through this before, made a couple of changes. It is it's historic landmark. That pretty much stayed the same. Section 15.44.120, plans approved prior to construction. This was a earlier section that I removed and put it in this location. So we reviewed that language before. Section 15.44.130, guidelines. The City Council by resolution may adopt guidelines for the retrofit of the building pursuant to this chapter. And we basically just left it as that statement, allowing the opportunity, if so desired, to develop separate guidelines. And these, yes.
Sorry, the guidelines are just helpful, right? They're not requirements that people would need to follow. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that it? Did we need, if that's just a guideline as opposed to a regulation, do we really need that to go all the way to the City Council? I mean, isn't that something staff could do, or if we need higher authority than the staff, just the Planning Commission? It seems like we're probably not going to do any guidelines at all, to be given how much backlog we have. But it just seems like to have something that's just sort of here's the helpful pamphlet, have to go all the way to City Council is just a guarantee that it ain't going to get done.
Well, it sounds like what we were talking about for residential structures would be a guideline.
But could that be done at the staff level rather than staff having to send it to commission, having to send it to council, I think is the question.
I don't know.
Yeah, I just think making it as low a level increases the chance that something actually happens.
This law has been around for 30 years. I guarantee you another city has come up with a pamphlet that explains what's going on, and, you know, find and replace shouldn't be that hard. It's not like you're inventing a new wheel here. This is nothing is new about this.
If it's intended to be advisory only, then staff could definitely do that. If it's intended to be mandatory, then that would have to go to the City Council.
Yeah, so since it's guidelines, we should change the language here that staff may put forth.
Just add the word advisory guideline, make it guidelines, advisory guidelines.
Yeah, we could say staff can promulgate advisory guidelines and helpful pamphlets or something like that.
Okay, we can do that. And outreach materials.
Exactly. That's a much better way of saying it.
You only have to make 25 copies.
That would be true.
Well, that's for this list. The single family list
Mhm.
is probably bigger. And that's where it might actually be helpful. Somebody might actually do something because of it.
Put it in a water bill.
Right. So these sections I relocated to the front of this chapter or the ordinance. So as you can see, this was all kind of removed in terms of order, including timing of service of the order. And then we go to order to retrofit recordation. Also, Alex was going to be providing some language here. He reviewed it again, and you felt that, I believe, that was sufficient as drafted.
I have a question.
I was gonna say, I added language elsewhere, I think at the end.
Okay.
I
because
think in the staff report, correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't it talk about an 8x10 sign that is posted on the building?
It's in the ordinance as well. I think it's later on. I don't think we got to it yet.
Okay. I was just hoping that it could be posted at eye level because some of these parapets are kind of tall and an 8x10 sign 30 feet off the ground may not attract the correct interest.
It's actually the next section in Commissioner Spears. We can add that language if you want.
Yeah.
So here's the notice requirements for public. And here's the discussion about the building shall post a sign in a conspicuous place on the entrance of the building on a sign not less than 8 inches by 10 inches. The following statement with the 2 words printed in 50-point bold type and the remaining words in at least 30-point bold type, or at least 30-point type.
The specificity for that also came from state law. So I would, if we're going to amend anything, I'd recommend that this be the floor, and it doesn't have to be the ceiling. We can always require larger print, and we can require, larger signage, but we shouldn't require less or smaller.
Can we just say at eye level?
We could. I think it might be better if we had like a certain number of feet, because I don't want to leave anything to interpretation.
So between 3 and
5 feet above grade, or which is typically maybe eye level for most.
at the primary entrance, 5 feet above grade.
Mhm.
It already says conspicuous place at the entrance of the building.
Oh.
Don't you think that's good
It's
enough?
conspicuous, but they're not. But I mean, I hate to think about it like this, but there are some people that, yeah, I'll put up your sign, and the sign is way up there. I believe for the hazardous material signs, they're also specified at a certain level so that everybody can read them.
We can say shall post in a conspicuous place at the entrance of the building, but no less than 5 feet above grade.
Okay.
Can we add something like, bright orange paper or chartreuse paper? I mean, seriously, because
Yeah, fine.
and you'll see it repeated throughout the town.
We could do that, words in at least 30-point type, and then print it on
Bright orange, how's that?
bright orange paper. I'll play with the language on that. certainly we can do that.
The sign won't make the building any safer, but it might provide some motivation.
And I don't think we made any other changes here. This was brought over from an earlier section to here. Penalties, I think the only changes we had here, a couple of statements. Such lien shall be superior to other liens, but is subordinate to taxes and improvement district payments. I'm looking at C. The city shall also submit notice to the mortgage lender of record. That was requested at the commission direction. And D, pursuant to Government Code Section 8875.7, the owner of the ORM may also be denied payment for any state assistance program for earthquake repairs resulting from damage during an earthquake until all other applicants have been paid.
Interesting. So, Alex, in this day and age, we have people who decide that they are not going to comply with government regulations. And it could very well be that one of those people owns a building in Sierra Madre that falls underneath this. What would be, so the building official would make them aware of the situation, and eventually the 360 days would go through, and we would send them some kind of notice about nuisance, and then what?
And then, so we have a whole section in our municipal code dedicated to the nuisance proceedings. I'm trying to recall now. I think a nuisance proceeding under our code as written I think it'd be a hearing first before the planning commission.
Right.
And after the hearing at the planning commission level, the planning commission makes a finding regarding whether there is a nuisance or not. And then it would go to the city council. And if it goes to the city council confirms, they order, the city council can actually order the retrofit and basically put a lien on the property if they don't pay for the cost of the retrofit.
Okay, this will be the worst possible case, because I think I think somebody's going to ask that question at some point in time.
Well, actually, no, it's not the worst possible scenario. The worst possible scenario for the building owner is we pursue criminal action, because it would be a misdemeanor to violate this. Any violation of our municipal code is a misdemeanor. If the city council was so inclined, if we felt we'd get nowhere with these people, then the city council could direct the city attorney to file misdemeanor, like criminal misdemeanor charges against this property owner. And that would be the worst scenario.
And so they pay a misdemeanor fine, and the building, nothing changes?
Not necessarily. It depends on what the court orders. A misdemeanor punishable by up to $1,000. It's a $1,000 fine or 6 months in jail, and then whatever other remedy the judge decides.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm sure someone's going to ask you, what's the worst that can happen here? Okay.
Yeah.
And then the last two sections, one of them is appeals. These were modifications by the commission. Appeals of the application and administration of this code shall be made to the planning commission and shall follow the procedures and provision of section 17.66.050. Appeals of the technical retrofitting requirements under the California building codes shall be heard according to the appeal provisions of chapter 15.02 administrative code.
So can we just talk about how this would work in practice if, let's say we sent out these notices and somebody says, hey, my building shouldn't be on this list because I already did a retrofit. According to our code, it says that a structural analysis is performed, but I mean, are we going to make them do a structural analysis if they actually did a retrofit already?
No, I think we would just confirm that. But if there were a case where there's a masonry building with no evidence of seismic retrofit, and depending upon the age of the building, if it's built maybe 40s, 50s, 60s, there's greater likelihood that there is still rebar in that building. And what we could do is ask for the building to be x-rayed to confirm that.
Okay. But if for one reason or another, staff says you got to do X, Y, and Z, and the property owner says, no way, I'm not doing that, they could appeal then from staff up to the planning commission, and we could hear it.
That's correct.
Okay, that works for me.
Okay. And the final section, filing, the city shall file a copy of the city council ordinance adopting chapter 15.44 and all accompanying exhibits with the California Seismic Safety Commission for government code section 8875.2 subsection C. So we wanted to make sure that we updated the Seismic Safety Commission with this new list.
Excellent.
And that concludes the changes that we have. So my question, I'm going to stop sharing this document. So what is the desire of the commission? I know we have to open up for public hearing, but my desire is to move this forward to city council, or do you desire to see this one more time?
I guess I'd like to hear public comment first, if there's anybody who.
I did have one. We received public comment on January 20th about a building that was listed on here that apparently was listed erroneously per the owner. Did that get removed from this list, or what happened to that?
So we searched through our building permit records and we didn't see anything in reference to retrofit or even x-raying the building. So I don't have any records of this. This building was constructed in 1959. So I think it would really require possibly another revisit by our building official to see if there's anything that we can determine visually. I believe this is just a one-story building.
So there were two properties listed, and they said that the drawings that they have for when they were built.
Right,
So,
and if they have those drawings, they could certainly bring those in and we can look at them and make that call. That would be the best case scenario. If they did not have any plans, then I think even though the complaint alluded that the building was confirmed not to be retrofitted or to have seismic retrofit or to have steel in the concrete masonry units, then we wouldn't have to, we could take them off the list. Right now, we would need a little bit more documentation.
okay.
Tell you that the addresses that we initially came up with were as a result that we couldn't find anything in the files that showed a completed inspection. There were some that had a few drawings in there, but nothing that showed. And then I think you went back and looked through more and cleared a number of them, but there were some that for which there was no documentation at all. And, so they were on the original list from whenever it was that Steve Pock and that group created the list, but there was nothing showing that subsequent to that, the issue had been addressed. Although I think since then you've cleared a few more that you found documentation for.
We did. We've found certificates of compliance.
Okay, well.
But again, going back to what we discussed before with the appeal period, the fact that somebody's on this list and gets a notice doesn't mean they have to do a retrofit necessarily. It means they have to prove that their building is safe first, or do a retrofit if necessary. So if these people have plans that show that the building was built with appropriate rebar or was retrofitted at some point, and they can demonstrate that, then they're done.
All right, is there anything else for staff from the commission before we head to public comment?
No.
Anything else for commission for staff? Questions?
So the one thing I have is that in the staff report, it talks about, if so desired, planning commission can establish a tiered deadline for each risk level. We've addressed that the risk levels are pretty much a matter of occupancy and not a matter of structural issues. And so we've put them all into one into one timeline.
That's correct.
Okay.
All right, any other questions from commission? All right, we get the slide up. At this time, any person may address the Planning Commission concerning this particular item on the agenda. The commission welcomes your attendance and participation virtually. When addressing the commission, please begin by providing your name and address for the record. Please keep comments to no more than 5 minutes to assure an orderly and timely meeting. No action or discussion may be undertaken by the Planning Commission of any item. If it's not posted on the agenda, we will be speaking specifically about item number 1, Unreinforced Masonry Building Ordinance and Risk Reduction Program. It appears as if we have an attendee. Mr. Milan, is there anybody to let in?
Chair Dennison, there does not appear to be anyone wishing to make a public comment at this time.
Okay, we'll give people just another minute or two here to dial in. So if the attendee listed were to want to make a comment, they would need to click the raise hand button on their Zoom link, is that right?
That is correct, sir. Thank you for clarifying that.
We do have one attendee that's listed, so if they did want to make a comment, they should click on the raise hand button along the bottom of their Zoom. This time, we're just holding for 1 more minute to give people time to dial in and provide public comment on item number 1, Unreinforced Masonry Building Ordinance and Risk Reduction Program. Again, just waiting, final 30 seconds here for people to dial in and provide public comment on item number 1, Unreinforced Masonry Building Ordinance and Risk Reduction Program. All right, seeing that there is nobody who has dialed in as of yet, we will go ahead and bring this back to the commission for discussion.
I can start off then. I think that the first order of business on this has to be to say a big round of thank you to Commissioner Spears. This has been a labor of love for him that's been many years in the making, and I think we can safely say without Bob's efforts, we wouldn't be doing this. And so thank you very much. I know that you personally went out with Rod Spears and did inventory, really pushed this along, and I thank you for your efforts. I think this is going to make the city a safer place. I think the ordinance as revised is very good. I think staff, both legal counsel and planning staff did a great job in revising based on our comments. I think we've noted a few edits tonight, and none of those I think are big enough that for me, I think we need to see come back. It would be nice if when it goes to plan or to city council, if staff could email us a red line, or just if the red line's in the packet for city council, let us know when that's happening, so that if there's any typos or any other things we want to say, we can bring those up at the city council meeting. But I don't see any reason to hold this up, and I think it's best to get it moving along.
Commissioner Dallas?
I agree with John Hutt on all counts, and thanks, Bob and Vincent and staff.
Commissioner Spears?
Yeah, this came out of the fact that I'm standing in some of our buildings in downtown, looking around, wondering why I'm not seeing bolts going through the walls, and then starting asking questions. So I'm glad we can address this. I hope it makes the city safer. I want everybody to know, though, that this will not make these buildings safe. This will just make them a little less dangerous. But this is not the perfect solution to the problem. It's kind of an awkward Band-Aid, but it's 30 years overdue. So at least we should comply with the law as written 30 years ago. So I'm grateful for staff support on this. I'm really happy that this is moving forward. It's something that's overdue, and it puts Sierra Madre back in the mix with all the other cities. So good for us.
Yeah, I want to echo everybody's sentiments about all the hard work from staff, from council, from Mr. Raskin to go through all this, and obviously the people who helped put the list together, including Commissioner Spears. Thank you very much. It sounds like we're all in agreement that there's nothing here that wouldn't keep us from, or that would keep us from sending this up to council with the recommended edits. So I would love to hear a motion to do so.
Also move.
I will second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Out of order, we're now going to get the council liaison report, if there is anything to report. Thank you for joining us.
There's nothing to report this time. You guys are probably updated on most things. I guess the one thing we've got is we're looking to have our next in-person meeting on the March 9th council meeting. And I think that's all, unless there's any questions that anybody has for council.
Great, thank you. That brings us to Planning Commission reports. I guess at this time we'll take reports from anybody on the any of the commissioners.
I have a report.
Fantastic.
I listened to a really interesting podcast yesterday called 99% Invisible, and it's something about stuccos, something about stuccoing, but it talks about the city of Santa Fe and how in their effort to preserve the community over 30, 40, 50 years, they really restricted development and themed it all towards the Adobe style, Pueblo style. And because they liked the small community and the whole feeling of it. And the end effect was that they had a lot of rich people move in to Santa Fe for the arts and everything, and the prices went up and the community left, and now they're left with a city that's downtown that has a lot of empty second and third dwellings for people. It was just a very interesting study. I don't think it has a direct implication for Sierra Madre, but as we do head into the, I guess, the monastery development, it's just something to think about. There are a lot of implications to the planning decisions that are being made. And I don't know, if you just like planning issues, check it out.
It's a good book too.
Oh, the 99% Invisible book?
Yeah.
It is, yeah, I like the whole podcast, but that one, that's the latest podcast is just very fascinating from a planning point of view. And so, that's it.
Thank you. Any other commissioners? All right. Planning and Community Preservation staff reports.
So currently scheduled for our February 18th Planning Commission meeting. We will have a housing legislative update by our city attorney. And also the commission will be reviewing another draft ordinance of affordable housing. There are further amendments from the last ones that we just recently did in response to state law. Also on the 18th, possibility that we are going to be hearing a CUP for the AT&T wireless cell tower that would be located next to our fire department. And also at our last meeting, staff was asked to bring back a list of upcoming items that would be we would be updating, and we also asked the commission to offer some input as well. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen one more time. And now it's not let me find that document again. Can everybody see that? So this is our priority list of potential code amendments for the calendar year 2021. And one of them is, of course, we're going to have to update our land use map and zoning map amendments from the general plan. Want to make that a priority and bring that to the commission as soon as possible. We're also going to be updating our ADU ordinance. Also reducing maximum allowed floor area in all residential zones by 800 square feet to offset and promote the development of ADUs. Currently, we're doing that by director's interpretation. And at that point, we can get feedback from the commission on how best to approach this. We're also looking at reorganization of the code relating to community development projects and or an easier to understand and reference development guidelines and standards booklet that was suggested by Commissioner Dallas. And did you want to explain that one a little bit further, Commissioner?
Sure. It's just really hard to find things in there. And I've talked to some of their architects, and they say, yeah, they think that's why some of their clients hire them, just to sort through the code. And I have seen other cities that have guidelines and standards booklets that make it really clear what's desired. And the advantage of a guidelines and standards booklet is you not only have the code, which are the standards, but you can suggest guidelines which paints a broader picture of what you want and makes it a little more clear. So,
Okay. And then the next bullet point, ordinance cleanup items. This is a list that staff has been keeping over the course of the last year, and some of the zoning code amendments that were not included in some of the last revisions. So this one, 17.48.130 subsection F, is to remove the MCUP for arbors and decorative features. Currently, arbors and other decorative features within the front yard setback would require a minor conditional use permit. If you recall, there were a number of complaints from property owners who were cited for illegal installation of arbors in the front yard. And that was brought before City Council as a concern. Also 17.20, reduce prevailing front yard setback to 25 feet. I know the commission had some discussions about that. So these are some of the items that we captured that have come up over time. 17.60.041 is required architect for design review applications. We talked about that, and it was included in a prior draft and was omitted. So possibly reinstating that requirement, at least for projects that would require full design review. 1760.056, amend the process for discretionary demolitions permit for properties with an historic status code of 6Z. The reason for looking at this is discretionary demolition permits were really only meant for projects that were eligible for designation. So currently we require projects that are over 75 years of age or buildings over 75 years of age to obtain a historic resource evaluation report, a DPR form. And if that report comes back that that building has a status code of 6Z, then it has no historic significance. And that a building with that designation could even be demolished. But in most cases, people are doing additions to a building or a residence that is now determined does not have any historic significance. So we are proposing to eliminate the requirement for a discretionary demolition permit because it's over 75 years of age with an historic resource evaluation. Part of the housing element update, we need to put in a couple of references to allow modular housing in all residential zones and the manufacturing zone. We also, as part of the housing element update, need to clarify that we do permit community care facilities with 6 beds or fewer in all residential zones. Currently, we're silent on that because state law allows community care facilities or group living facilities with 6 residents or fewer by right. But apparently, for the housing element update, we need to make it more clear. And also to amend the review procedures in hillside management zone section 17.52.090 subsection E subsection 4 to include reference to height restrictions pursuant to section 17.52.160C. That came up at our one of our earlier reviews. So basically, we wanted to clarify and add that section reference so we can go ahead and use it for a greater allowance for height restrictions or easing up on the height restrictions for hillside management zone. And that was the staff cleanup list. And I don't know if the Planning Commission has any other items they wanted to include in here at this point. You can always add, if you think of anything else, you can always send it via email and we can include it.
Any commissioners have anything? Commissioner Hutt?
Yeah, I have a number of items. I sort of am resisting the temptation to comment on something that's not specifically on the agenda. And so I guess one question I have is, could we agendize this as a discussion topic so that we could maybe talk about the priorities of these things and how they interrelate, and people could discuss? Because I think some of these, well, I think all of this stuff is actually really important. So the question is, you know, we don't have enough time to do it all at once. What's the priority? And also perhaps we could try to get some input. You know, if we put together a priorities list and then send it to the city council to get a blessing that makes sense, or, you know, the thing you thought was number priority 2 really isn't all that important, do it last, or don't do it at all, so that we don't, you know, invest a lot of time going down a road that just ends up going nowhere. Because some of these cleanup items, you know, we've already covered. And so I just want to make sure we're all rowing the same direction before we start rowing.
Yeah, and that was certainly the impetus of this request, to ensure that we all get aligned internally. So if maybe to your point about talking about something that's not agendized, that we can go ahead and agendize this for the next meeting so that we can have an open conversation about it, prioritize it, and then send it up through staff to council for prioritization.
Will do. So I'll include that. Possibly on the March 4th agenda, because I think we have, it depends on if we have the cell tower review conditional use permit. We're looking at an ordinance, reviewing an ordinance in the housing element or housing legislative update. So if everything holds, then I would probably move that to the 4th of March.
Vincent, I sent you a thought about ADUs and guidance documents.
Yes.
Can we put that in parentheses after the ADU ordinance update? Because while they're entitled by law, I think it's important that maybe the community be aware of their impact. You know, I think they have I think there are some issues that are going to come up with more ADUs that are going to impact R1 neighborhoods and make people slightly uncomfortable or unhappy.
So I assume that to be agendized, that we would need, for the staff report, we would need to get all of these to you in advance so that they can be distributed as part of the agenda. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So we'll need to send to you and only you, not to anybody else on the commission,
Right.
just directly anything that we want added. Don't you laugh, Commissioner Hutt.
So that's all I had for this evening.
All right.
So Vincent, just to clarify Tom's point, when do you need these by, our thoughts, if we want to get them on the agenda?
Well, if it could be very informal, I'll just do a very, very brief staff report. Probably I would need it the Thursday, 1 week prior to our meeting, because our packets usually would go out on the Thursday, the week before.
So if we want it for, if the tower doesn't appear on the next one, you would need them by, we should have them to you by end of day the 10th. So next Wednesday.
Yes.
End of
Okay.
day commission, so anything you want to get on there. Good question, thank you. All right, is there anybody else who has anything to bring before the commission? Hearing none, I will close this meeting until our next regular meeting of the commission on February 18th, 2021. Thank you all.
Right?
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.